A good cartoon is like a stinging editorial, except more concise. It uses pictures to evoke thought, to expose double standards. But sometimes the cartoon itself is a double standard. Let me show you. This cartoon appeared on a German magazine called Der Spiegel. It means the mirror in German, Der Spiegel. On this occasion, a foggy and broken mirror. The subject is clear. It's about India's population overtaking China's. But look at how it's been depicted. India is the overcrowded train with people hanging outside the compartment. And China? China is a sophisticated bullet train. It's falling behind, but it appears unbothered. Just like the subject, the message is also clear. China is economically advanced while India is backward. Many people on the internet have called this cartoon racist, and we agree. The India of 2023 is not about run-down trains with people on the roof. It's about modern, sustainable machines. Some, like the Vande Bharat, can rival European trains. But why care about the facts? Why bother with accuracy when you can peddle prejudice? One Twitter user laid out the numbers. In Germany, only 61% of train routes are electric. Guess how much it is in India? 85%. In fact, Germany's target for 2030 is only 75%. But like I said, why care about the facts? Cartoons are supposed to be subtle yet accurate. This one is neither. It's a crass attempt at peddling old and racist ideas about India. Remember the snake charmer stereotype? Well, this is no different. And the Western media keeps doing it again and again. Let me show you another cartoon from 2014. It's from a repeat offender, the New York Times. This was around the time India had completed its mission to Mars. Look at how the NYT depicted it. A man with a cow knocking on a door. Inside the building, it says Elite Space Club. That cartoon also triggered a lot of outrage. The New York Times ended up apologizing. But what's the point? Years later, Western attitude has not changed. It was a man with a cow in 2014. It's an overcrowded train today. The fact is, such stereotypes attract eyeballs. They showcase India as some exotic basket case. And that's one part of the problem. The second part is this. These cartoons reflect a denial of sorts. The West simply cannot accept India's growth story. How can a former colony with 1.4 billion people do what Britain or Germany does? And that too with hostile neighbors. That too without Western help. How can India do it? The idea is unacceptable for Western journalists and publishers. Hence these cartoons. India's Union Minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar has reacted sharply to this depiction. He said it's not wise to bet against India. He's also said that India's economy would soon be bigger than Germany's. Now, I know what some people will say. Why bother responding to such cartoons? Why not ignore them altogether? Well, I'll tell you why. Because this is how perceptions build. Imagine you're an ordinary German sitting in Berlin or Munich. You see this cartoon. What's your first thought? That China is some tech wonderland, while India is a poor country with crumbling infrastructure. Do you see the problem here? You expect this sort of propaganda from China's state media, in fact, even from the Chinese government. Last week, they were asked about India overtaking China's population. Do you know what the reply was? It's about quality, not quantity, they said. If you could convert those words into a cartoon, it would look like this one, the same one that Der Spiegel published. You see, China is working overtime to change the narrative around this news. They have two objectives here. One is to hide their own demographic slowdown, their aging population. The second is to discredit India's rise. And unfortunately, the West has fallen for it. Let's face it, this is not just about India versus China. It's about two different approaches to economic development and growth. India represents democracy. It shows that democracy may be slow, but it can deliver. China, meanwhile, represents autocracy. It sacrifices its freedom for growth. The question is, which one would you prefer? I know what the 2 million Uyghurs in China's labor camps will say. I also know what 7 million Tibetans will say, and the ethnic Mongols and the ethnic Kazakhs. China's growth is built on the grave of freedoms and human rights. Is that the sort of growth Western magazines want to applaud? And if so, it's their editorial call, but at least represent the truth about India. Don't peddle racism to sell your copies. Some things are inevitable in our world, like taxes, death, and military coups in Pakistan. Well, jokes aside, there is actual talk of a military takeover. The claim has come from Shahid Khaqan Abbasi. He is a former prime minister and senior leader of the ruling party. So he's a bigwig, not some political lightweight in Islamabad. And let me quote what Abbasi said. Pakistan has had many long periods of martial law in very similar situations. In fact, I would say Pakistan has never witnessed a more severe economic and political situation before. In much less severe circumstances, the military has taken over. That was a former prime minister. He might as well have laid a red carpet for the generals. I mean, it's an open invitation. The question is, what explains it? Shahid Abbasi is blaming institutional failure for this. Let me quote him again. Military takeovers have happened in many countries. When the political and constitutional system fails, extra constitutional measures take place. How about that for democracy? A former prime minister is openly defending military coups. Abbasi's statement is a reflection of the systemic rot in Pakistan. You will never hear such a statement in a real democracy. It tells you how far Pakistan has fallen. For now, let's focus on Abbasi's invitation/statement. How likely is a military coup in Islamabad? Abbasi is right about one thing. Pakistan's economic and political woes have peaked. Forex reserves are down to $4 billion. To put that figure in perspective, India has more than $586 billion. Pakistan has 4. Inflation is at 47%. Projected growth, 0.5%. And around 16% of all graduates are jobless. Politically, things are even worse. The government of Shehbaz Sharif is deeply unpopular. They are under constant pressure from Imran Khan and the PTI. And what's worse, October is election time, so the army has 2 options. One is to rig the elections to keep Imran Khan out, but it may work, may not work, but a backlash could spiral out of control. The second is to stay out and risk an Imran victory, which is unlikely. Looking at the army's history, there is a third option, of course, the nuclear option. Scrap the elections and take power themselves. It is by no means unprecedented. Pakistan has spent half of its lifetime under military rule. There have been 3 successful coups in 75 years. So another one is not impossible. Far from it. Having said that, 2023 is not 1958 or 1977 or 1999, which is when the coups happened. The times have changed. For starters, there is a new army chief in Rawalpindi, General Asim Munir. He took charge in November last year, November 2022. Will he be confident enough to unseat the civilian government so early in his term? Does he have the unquestionable loyalty of his men? That's gamble number 1. Gamble number 2 is the domestic reaction. In the past, Pakistan's elite had supported military takeovers. I'm talking about businessmen and even journalists. Will they do it again? Like I said, it's a gamble. Number 3 is the foreign reaction. You see, the dictatorships in 1977 and 1999 enjoyed American support, and both times the reason was the same, Afghanistan. But this time around, the Americans may not play ball. They have no stake in Afghanistan anymore. Plus, they have a strategic partnership with Pakistan's chief rival, that is India. It wasn't the case in the last century. These factors will influence the decision of the generals in Pakistan. A successful coup may resolve the political bickering. It may also provide some policy direction, but a failed coup would be a deadly blow to the Pakistani army. It may destroy their aura of invincibility in Pakistani politics. The bottom line is this: while it's possible for the army to take power, it's not probable. If General Munir decides to go maverick, then all bets are off, of course. But as things stand, it looks unlikely. India, too, will be watching the events in Islamabad closely. A military coup in a nuclear-armed rogue neighbor is never good news. The only option is to prepare for the worst. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. These 5 countries are together called BRICS. It's a grouping, and this group may soon disrupt the global power structure. It's expanding. As many as 19 countries want to join the BRICS, and this is very significant. In a divided world, this group may emerge as a force to reckon with. You may think, how does yet another group help? And why should you care? Well, tonight we'll discuss why. In about 2 months from now, The BRICS summit will be held. South Africa is the host, and one of the agenda items is the expansion of BRICS. Like I said, 19 countries want to join. A South African diplomat has shared the details. Let me quote from what he said. What will be discussed is the expansion of BRICS and the modalities of how this will happen. 13 countries have formally asked to join, and another 6 have asked informally. We are getting applications to join every day. Which countries are these? We don't have the full list, but we do know of 2 countries that have formally asked to join. These are Saudi Arabia and Iran. And among those interested are Argentina, the UAE, Algeria, Egypt, Bahrain and Indonesia. They all want to join BRICS. The question is why? These countries already have multiple platforms to engage. They have bilateral engagements where leaders have one-on-one meetings. They have multilateral engagements like the G20 or Group of 20 top economies, or the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and of course the United Nations. So multiple avenues to engage. Then why bother with the BRICS? Because our world is changing. Globalization as we know it is ending. The pandemic disrupted it, and the Ukraine war accelerated its end. It has left our world divided into 2 blocks, one led by the US and its Western allies, and the other led by China and Russia. Where does it leave countries that don't want to join either camp? Countries that still want to enjoy the perks of globalization without picking sides. And there are more such countries than you would imagine. They don't want to pay the price for a great power game. Look at this map. How many countries are in the Western camp? 52. They criticize Russia. They have sanctioned Moscow for the war in Ukraine. What about the other side, the Russia-China-led camp? It has 12 members, just 12. What about the rest? There are some 127 states that fall in neither camp, 127 countries who have neither supported Russia nor criticized the NATO. They did not join the sanctions against Russia. These non-aligned nations are the majority, and they have a clear agenda now. They're being both pragmatic and opportunistic, and they want a forum to present their case. BRICS could be that forum, although it does have Russia and China as members, but they've so far not been allowed to hijack the agenda. This forum has advocated for globalization to be kept intact, and it has several compelling proposals in the pipeline. There is talk of a BRICS currency. It may not happen immediately, but it's an interesting proposal. It's a proposal to bypass the US dollar in international trade. BRICS members are also building new trade routes. One of them is the International North-South Transportation Corridor. It could speed up movement of cargo from Russia to countries like India. And proposals like these are attracting the non-aligned states. They want mechanisms that are largely insulated from the great power rivalry. BRICS provides them an option. This may have given the group a new purpose, saving globalization. Now let's come to a pertinent question of our times. What is war good for? Is it good for absolutely nothing? Or does it help business? The results are in, and as expected, one business is having a stellar year, the global military-industrial complex. The latest numbers are out. World military expenditure has reached a record high. It has reached $2,240 billion, or more than $2.2 trillion. Last year's growth is fueled mostly by Europe, which is expected, of course, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The war has shaken off the years of military complacency in Europe and started a global arms race all over again. Our next report brings you the details.
The war in Ukraine was bound to impact global military spending. It's the biggest conflict in mainland Europe since the Second World War, and it has alarmed European nations. Global military spending has gone up by 3.7%. In Europe, there's a jump of 13%, and the top spenders are countries close to Russia. Finland increased military expenditure by 36%, Lithuania by 27%, Sweden 12%, Poland 11%. Of course, the biggest spender was Ukraine. Its military expenditure shot up by a whopping 640%. In 2022, Ukraine spent over $44 billion on defense. What about Russia? It spent $86.4 billion. That's a rise of over 9% from the previous year. It seems like a modest rise, But given the fact that Russia was the world's third largest military spender anyway, the 9% bump is significant. Overall, almost every part of the world saw higher spending on arms. Leading the way, as always, was the US. Its military expenses totaled $877 billion in 2022. Remember, the global total is about $2.2 trillion, so Washington is single-handedly responsible for 39% of total global military spending. And while some of that was for arms to Ukraine, the majority was still for US defense purposes. America spent about 1.5 times what all of Asia and Oceania did on defense last year. And remember, Asia houses the second largest military spender in the world, China. China's military spending grew by 4.2% to about $292 billion. It's nowhere close to the US in terms of spending, but far beyond other nations. This is bad news for overall global stability. An arms race between rival powers that eclipses all others. It has very Cold War vibes to it. The fourth biggest military spender in the world is India. New Delhi spent $81.4 billion on arms. It's part of the recent trend of India's greater military focus. Number 5 on the global list is Saudi Arabia. The Gulf Kingdom increased military spending by 16%. It's Riyadh's first increase since 2018. Last year, Saudi Arabia spent a total of $75 billion on its military. It's not all gloom and impending doom, though. There were some exceptions to the global trend. Like Turkey and Nigeria, Nigeria's military spending fell by 38%. But this is just compared to 2021. That year saw Nigeria increase its spending tremendously, so it's more of an adjustment than a proper decrease. Turkey, however, saw military spending go down for the third year in a row. It's down 26% compared to 2021. But that's also expected due to the terrible economic condition of the country. It's been facing a crisis since 2018, and last year it saw more than 50% inflation. So it's not surprising that its military expenses have been falling for a while. Overall, the outlook for peace looks bleak. The war in Ukraine is likely to spur military spending for years to come. So will the rivalry between the US and China. Every nation will try and arm itself to the teeth, and it leaves the world more unstable. Like always, the only ones who will benefit are arms companies.
Politicians are thin-skinned. It's an open secret in most countries. They hate any sort of criticism. But for a long time, they had no option but to hear it. You couldn't just jail every single critic or block their voice out. But with social media, most criticism has shifted online. It has also become a lot more personal and toxic. People don't just attack policies, they also attack a public official's identity, even their family. As they say in boxing, cheap shots. Social media platforms do have an answer for this problem. It's called the block button. If someone is personally attacking you, just block them. But as always, some public officials use it for the wrong reasons. Don't like an opinion? Block the user. Don't agree with the criticism? Block. Not interested in a complaint? Well, block away. It's an easy way out for public officials. The question is, should they have this power? Should they have the power to block people? The US Supreme Court is debating this question. It is hearing two different cases, both related to blocking users. I'll give you a quick rundown. The court will decide if blocking users is a violation of the First Amendment of the US Constitution. Now, what does the First Amendment talk about? Freedom of speech, among other things. And this promises to be an interesting legal debate. There are multiple questions to answer. Number one, is blocking someone the same as muzzling them? Because a block is not like a ban. Your tweets or posts only become unavailable to that person, not to the entire platform. Number two, does social media activity count as government work? If it does, then blocking is dangerous. If not, it could be considered a personal action. It's one of those confusing debates. On the one hand, toxicity and hate are real problems. So is a leader crushing dissent. Let me tell you about a study conducted in Germany. It found that 54% of all German mayors had experienced online hate. More than half of them ignored it. 5% of them blocked the user and 8% filed a judicial complaint. So in most cases, public officials just take it on the chin. But there is a disproportionate impact. Women and minority leaders face more hate online. Sometimes it forces them to quit their job. Let me introduce you to Kia Morris. She was the only African-American lawmaker in the U.S. state of Vermont, but in 2018 she stepped down. The reason? A wave of online and offline hatred. Another example is Nikki Morgan. She was a cabinet minister in the UK, but in 2019 she did not stand for re-election. The reason? Online abuse, among others. The situation in the UK is so bad that women's organizations have raised an alarm. They say female lawmakers are retiring much earlier, a major reason being the barrage of abuse and hate. A third example is Lisa van Ginneken. She's the first transgender MP in the Netherlands, but in 2022 she announced she is leaving Twitter. The reason? Online hate. For such officials and leaders, the block button is important. Not for crushing dissent, but for their mental peace and sanity. Having said that, there is another side to this debate, and that side is leaders like Donald Trump. He is said to have blocked hundreds of users on Twitter, from journalists to writers to comedians. In fact, his blocking spree became a legal case. A federal judge in the US ordered Trump to unblock multiple accounts. The judge said it is a violation of the First Amendment. Trump did move the Supreme Court, but by then he was out of office. Now, the US Supreme Court has another shot at the case. Their decision could set a template elsewhere, because online hate is a problem in most countries. I think we can all agree that politicians will never stop using social media. I think we can also agree that social media will never become 100% hate-free. So what's the solution? The bare minimum should be guidelines. Yes, politicians have signed up for a career of criticism, but stick to policies. Don't drag in their family or their race or their gender into it. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Italian Coast Guard has released dramatic footage of a migrant rescue operation. Migrants can be seen desperately trying to be rescued after their boat sank. In Spain, police tried to catch hold of suspected drug dealers. This high-speed chase looks right out of an action movie. In Peru, a 1,000-year-old mummy has been found. It has some skin and hair intact. Scientists believe it was an adolescent. A movie theater in the US had an unanticipated visitor, a moose. It helped itself to some popcorn and casually left. In New Zealand, Aurora Australis lit up the sky over Christchurch. And finally, what makes April the 25th significant? We are taking you back in history. On this day, construction of the Suez Canal began. The year was 1859. The idea was discussed in the 1830s. There was a need for a larger canal, providing a direct route between the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. The construction took 10 years. More than 1 million people worked on the project. It is believed that tens of thousands of workers even died due to cholera and other factors. The project was 4 years behind schedule. It was finally completed in 1869. This man-made waterway cuts through Egypt and is very important to world trade, so much so that world powers have fought over it. Today, it is one of the world's busiest maritime trade routes. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Come on, come on, come on. Give me your hand, give me your hand, give me your hand. Okay, keep on, okay? Keep it up, okay, my friend? Left side, okay? Keep up. Come on!
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.